Hello everyone. Today for this random talk or random video Sunday, I thought I would discuss a topic that's been sort of on my mind lately, and I'm kind of curious as to what people have to say about it. And this particular topic deals with political parties. In particular, I'll probably be discussing the political parties that exist within my country, the United States, because I'm more familiar with our politics. I'm more engaged and involved with the United States in regards to politics, because I understand how our system works, and how we have these various different ideologies that exist. And these two ideologies, in case you're not from the United States, you may not know, but these two ideologies fall as either being conservative / Republican, or being liberal / Democrat. The thing that I have an issue with in regards to political parties is I think that they are a way of classifying our populace. Either you're this or you're that. There's no in between. There's no way of identifying yourself either way. It's either you're this or you're that, or you just say I'm not part of a party, or you're part of a minority party that really doesn't get a whole lot of attention. Or I actually heard the libertarian movement is kind of growing, but still, you still have these two major ones: the Republicans on one end and the Democrats on the other hand. And I think the problem with this mentality is that there's either a right or wrong answer, and the right or wrong answer revolves around which party wins. It's all about duking it out and winning. It's not about looking at facts, looking at the logic behind both arguments, and realizing that maybe there can be some benefits from both sides of an issue, or that certain issues that maybe revolve around a certain area might work more by doing it in a conservative way rather than a liberal way, or maybe some more social issues might work more to society's benefit and be on the liberal side, or vice versa, depending, I guess, who you talk with. But it seems to me that these two parties really divide people and make people really angry and bitter, and it's to the point where I feel like it's about, we don't care about what the other side has to say, we just want to beat the other side. We want to win. And that's really, I think, what politics revolves around. At least I feel in the United States, it's all about the battle. It's all about the debate. It's not about talking to one another and coming to some kind of consensus, or kind of seeing the logic behind each of the arguments. It's about beating the other side. It's about hammering in that topic or that aspect of politics into the other side, so that the other side will cave in and lose. I think that has to do with a lot too, that a lot of elected officials within the United States have not come from different, I guess, career backgrounds. At least from what I can tell, a lot of our politicians in the United States over the years have been like lawyers, or have had some kind of law experience, or deal mostly with law. And when you're dealing with law, you're trying to use the law in a way that benefits your client, or the person that you work for. And I feel like these political parties sort of work in the same way. You have your Democrats who want to push their idea, their agenda, their thought process into everybody's mind, and say that that's the right way to go. And it's the same with the Republicans, in that they push their ideology, they push their own mindset, and they don't see that really there's some logical and illogical aspects to either side of the argument. And nobody wants to use logic, nobody wants to use reason or kind of look at things through a psychological and logical lens. It seems like everybody wants to look at it for their side, their agenda. It's not about really getting together and figuring out what's logical and best for the American public. It's about duking it out and winning and gaining that control over the American populace that will ultimately say, yes, we support you, so-and-so, or we support you, so-and-so. You know, there's no, I feel like political parties really make this really complicated, and it becomes really unproductive, and then all of these problems that the American people might be going through get really pushed and pushed and pushed because they just keep fighting and fighting and fighting, and it's not for the American people, it's for their own personal interests, it's for their own agenda that they have set up. So it just seems like we keep pushing whatever problems that the country's facing to the side and not realizing, hey, maybe we could solve it this way if we maybe had less government, and hey, maybe it would be best if the government stood up and took a stance on this issue, or yada yada yada. And the interesting thing is, political parties, at least within the United States, have existed pretty much to its founding. But the ironic thing is that our first president ever, George Washington, was the first and only one that did not affiliate himself with any party. He did not. He basically he was kind of caught in between Adams and Jefferson. From the research that I could gather, it seemed like Washington didn't associate completely with Jefferson's point of view, and then not really entirely with Adams' point of view. I believe it was Adams was Federalist and Thomas Jefferson was like anti-Federalist. Again, kind of similar to today, how maybe, I guess you would say, John Adams is more liberal because he's more for centralized kind of government, and then you have Jefferson here who's kind of more laissez-faire and says, no, we shouldn't have government involved and whatnot. But obviously the politics and stuff was completely different than it is nowadays. But there has been this existence and this mentality that we need to associate ourselves with one of these parties, that we have to classify ourselves as such. And the funny thing is when we say we're something, we get automatically judged by other American people. It kind of pins us against each other. Like if you say, yeah, I'm liberal, everybody will be like, oh, no, I'm conservative, how dare you, and no. And then it's the same thing when you say you're conservative, and they're like, oh, you're conservative? That must mean that you're this and you're that, and they make this complete judgment of you. And it's crazy. And I think a lot of this not only has to do with the fact that we've created these parties to begin with, this idea that we have to duke it out and we have to fight and fight and fight and fight and not do anything at all, and just American people don't care. We care about our own interests, and we want to keep pushing and pushing this way and pushing that way and just keep going back and forth like a ping pong and not really do anything. And here are the American people just sitting there going, okay, what do we elect these people for? Like, what's the point of them being there? Just so that they can sit and argue and debate upon their own agenda and not really our agenda really at all? Or like, hey, you know, we've got some issues here, could you kind of work something through here? Like, is this somehow possible? And also the fact that our government has changed so much makes the whole process and political discourse a lot more complicated. But not only has it just been the the starting with this idea of we need two parties, we need to associate with ourselves with one guy against another guy. It's not only that, I think, but also the fact that our media has been very biased, I think, at least. I mean, I feel CNN might lean towards the middle, and that I don't feel like that they take so much of a side, but you can tell, if you watch MSNBC, you could totally tell Democrats, that's the party that they preach to. And if you go to Fox, those are the people that get preached, those are the conservatives, and that's who they associate themselves with, and those are what Fox News preaches to. And instead, it seems like CNN, although they do maybe have their biases maybe at times, I heard they're actually more of like a corporate kind of media outlet. But regardless, it seems like within our media we create this kind of this ideology where we're not really presented with the truth. We're presented again with this whole concept of debate and figuring out exactly what is the truth now. Because you'll have, it's so typical of our media to do this. Every news outlet does it. They have somebody from the right, and then they have somebody at the left, and then obviously both of them are going to say completely different things and say, no, you're wrong, this is the truth. And the other will come back and say, no, you're wrong, this is the truth. And it's never ultimately discovered, okay, what is the right solution here? What is the best way to solve our problem? Like, it feels like it's a constant battle zone. It's like a war. It's like a war of information and of facts and understanding the basis of establishing arguments, but not establishing really solutions. And when they establish solutions, it's either for their side, or it's or they don't even really come to a solution. They just argue it out, and then somebody will ultimately win, and then they go to people and ask, who do you think won this? They'll ask, they'll ask sort of like a premise of what the topic was about. I think CNN, like Crossfire, does this, where they'll be like, so do you think we should increase the minimum wage, or should we not keep it? Who do you think really won the battle? That's their whole shtick. And again, I'm not saying that one side is right, one side is wrong. What I'm saying is that there might be certain things that one side might favor that ultimately is what will lead to a brighter and will lead to a more truthful means to solving our problems. And then there might be another side that will be completely wrong on how to solve certain issues. So really, I think it just boils down to the fact of that it's not about talking. It's not about it's not about coming together and kind of like trying to do business or negotiate or figure out some way in which there can be something achieved that will make things better. No, it's about I'm for this guy, he's my team, I support him all the way through, no matter what, and I don't listen to what any other person has to say, and everything else that the other side puts forward is a bunch of this and a bunch of that. And that's really all that it seems like these political parties do. All they do is argue, all they do is debate, and all they do is just raise funds for their party. And it's really all about their party and all about their ideology, their means to get their message out. And to me, we shouldn't base our ideology on a party that was set up. We should base our ideology around things that are both maybe rational and may provide a means that maybe you may not agree ultimately with some of the decisions, but maybe realize that ultimately some of those decisions have to be made in order for us to have maybe a better society, a better future, regardless of how you personally feel about certain issues. So that's how people perceive, I think, themselves. Like we've gone to this mentality of, I'm Democrat, I see the guy's Democrat on the ballot, I'll vote for him. If it's Republican and I see it's a Republican guy, I'm gonna vote for him. Nobody looks at who this person is, where he's from, or where he or she's from, what she's done, what she knows about this, what he or she knows about that. There's no look as to who the person is. It's just whether or not they belong to this or that party. And I really don't get it. I really don't understand why we have to base our mentality on whether or not we're this or we're that. I don't get that, because both sides can be wrong, and both sides can offer solutions, and sometimes one side might have a better solution than another. But it doesn't mean that we need to create political parties in order to solve that issue. We just need to have raw facts and try to make our government not based upon self-interest, but rather on serving the people and making sure that they have freedom and all of those things that were sort of founded within our Constitution, which I think is, from what any political perspective you have, is pretty much what our country of the United States sort of embraces. But regardless, I don't see the point of associating myself with any particular party. I look at one side of certain things within each party, and I go, I just can't identify with this. I don't understand. Like, why can't we do it in a way that doesn't revolve around your ideology? Why can't we do it in a way where it works? Why can't we do it the way that where it has been proven to be productive and provides a means for our society to be able to exercise rights and be able to become more established, more educated? Why can't there be this kind of mentality of, we're not going to associate ourselves with one particular group? Why can't we just take the good things that maybe certain people have developed and use them and gain facts and use logic and apply that? Why do we need to base our whole mentality on associating ourselves as one person or another person? And I think it ultimately tears us even more further, because not only do you have the parties duking it out with each other and doing a bunch of putting in a lot of stuff that will ultimately allow for one party to be more swayed to go one direction, and then you have the American people sort of arguing amongst themselves, like conservatives and liberals arguing, constantly about the direction they want the country to go. And it's almost like it creates a war within our government and also on the outside, because you have all of these people who say, I know the answer and I know what the problem is, and I know, and none of these other people know, and you have all of this information, these news outlets that are telling you things, and you don't really know what to believe anymore. And I almost don't even know what to believe anymore. There'll be one person that'll come up and say, you know what, this is the most logical solution. And then you'll have somebody else who will come in with as to why that solution won't work. And then you're not sure whether or not if the first person was the really one who had the correct point, or if the person that said no, we can't do it that way, has the point too, because you don't really know if ultimately the information that's being told to you is true or not. I think there's just an inability for me to trust parties, to trust to trust that they will execute their job properly. I just feel like that I just can't trust both parties. I can't put myself into one category or another, because I just feel like both of them make everybody more angry and more bitter, and really create tension, and you just see how it's all about saying to the other side, you're wrong, I want to prove you wrong, instead of saying if some part of the argument has some point. It's very like I'm gonna prove myself, and I'm gonna push my ideology forward, and I'm gonna push that mentality. And the thing is I've never been like a pusher of people. Like, I just think everybody should believe in whatever they want to believe. It's just don't enforce ideology. And I think the important thing is that we don't force ideology, but we should be enforcing something that can be logical, and that could be salvageable, and that could work. And instead it's really about serving an ideology. It's serving ideas and concepts. And sometimes not all those ideas and concepts work all the time. Like, not everything can be conservative, and not everything can be liberal or Democrat. I just feel like that these parties, I really think that we should get rid of them, to be honest. I don't see how they make anything productive. They don't offer solutions. They just argue, and at the end of the day, all they want to do is win. It's all about winning. It's about dominance. It's about control. It's about power. It's not about using power. It's just having power, it seems like. It's not about giving that power to the American people. It's about gaining that power for themselves, gaining that power for their ideology, gaining that power of their influence of the American people, and not about the American people themselves. At least that's how I feel. I mean, I'm not saying that one side. I mean, I have people that I know people that are on both sides of the aisle. Some of them are a little extreme. I mean, a little extreme. But I mean, most people. I mean, for the most part, there's a few people that I know that are a little extreme, but most of the people I know are fairly in the middle, I would say. I mean, I feel like a lot of younger people are a little bit more in the middle. I would say that mostly young people, at least from what I've experienced nowadays, they're socially liberal to the point where they want more social rights, and the ability to be treated fairly, and be able to be put into an environment that can be productive and can allow for more rights and for more liberty. I think that's a lot of what social rights is, and I think a lot of people that are young sort of advocate that. And then there are others and then also I feel like a lot of young people are a little bit more fiscally conservative, at least financially. They feel like that spending is out of control. They feel like the the influence that government has, and the spending habits are too high, and that it should be more productive and less big, and should be allowed to be enforced more heavily. And I can kind of understand that mentality, and I think a lot of young people, categorize themselves in that kind of mindset, and I feel like that, from what I could tell, I feel that those kinds of logical perspectives that both sides have sort of fit in with how I see the world and how I see things. I just think if we took away these boxes, these categories, because beyond just like people associating themselves with one particular culture or a particular group, there's also this, I think, these two big forces of Democrats and Republicans, and I think a lot of the times people judge one another and don't consider their side of the argument, because they want to ultimately win the argument, and they don't want to look at the other perspective, and that perspective doesn't really fit with their mentality. But the thing is what we need to do is we need to just bring logic, we need to bring reason. We shouldn't bring in the mentality that everything that is fed to us through the media and through our politicians is true and is valid. And I don't think that we should base our mentality on either one of these two sides of the political spectrum. At least that's how I feel. I mean, I understand if there are those out there who strongly believe one side or strongly believe the other. But I feel like if people had more of a dialogue and would be willing to talk and not try to talk over each other and not try to yell at one another and not get so like hot-headed over everything, and take a chill pill and kind of just calm down and talk things out really on a more logical level, instead of basing their own preferences and their own ideology onto somebody else, then we would probably be more productive than having these two parties not only fight each other, but have us identify with either one of these parties and fight each other. I just don't see the mentality of, you're either this or you're this. There's no in the middle here. There's nothing, there's, you can't, think for yourself. You gotta drink the Kool-Aid for one of these parties. You gotta be one or the other. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not gonna identify myself as either. And I think a lot of young people are starting to not identify with a particular party, and it would just be nice, I think, regardless of what both parties ultimately believe in, and if you lean more one side than the other, or if you strongly believe one or strongly believe the other, that there is this open dialogue and this understanding that look, if you want to look at who's going to agree with you 100% of the time, the only way you're going to look at it is through a mirror. At least that's what I remember a quote hearing, because not everyone is going to think exactly the same way you do, and not everyone's ever going to approach problems the same way. But what we can do is just base it more upon facts and more around what's logically sensible, what's moral, what's right. If we base our politics more on those things instead of trying to base it upon fighting and trying to win an argument, then we would probably come to a better understanding, and we would probably, I think, have better solutions to our problems than arguing and then just yelling at one another and getting at each other's face and yeah, I understand if people are passionate about their political beliefs, but at the same time I feel like, just because somebody's on the opposite end of the aisle of you doesn't mean that they can't be your friend, that they can't be that you can't identify with them in some particular way. For example, like the example that I previously mentioned with John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Totally different people. Totally different ideas. Some probably had good arguments, and both of them probably had some bad arguments, Both sides had their problems and issues. No, I think, political thing that you put through is going to be 100% perfect. But what we should focus on is realizing that, we are people, and that no matter where we fall under the political spectrum, there's a level of respect we can have for each other. And this level of respect, I think, goes back to the founding of, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. And I believe both of their last words involved the other person's name. I can't remember who died first, but Thomas Jefferson mentioned John Adams before he died. And I believe John Adams mentioned Thomas Jefferson before he died. And and I don't think that there are any Republicans or any Democrats, at least today, that would be so respective of the other side that they would mention them before death. I mean, you're talking about some serious stuff here. I mean, I'm sure that there's a lot of politicians who've had different viewpoints but are still friends. But I don't see that kind of decorum or that kind of, I guess, still passion for the other person in that way, to the point where they would say their names before they go. So I don't know. I just think that that what we should do is we should try to find, we should figure out what works and figure out what's going to be productive, and do things how we would even if there isn't a government involved, because a lot of the times, when you're dealing with business or wherever, there's always negotiation, there's always interest involved. But if you can somehow come together and figure out what's the most logical and sensible way to execute a strategy or execute a plan or execute whatever needs to be done, instead of trying to win an argument, and have it be more about negotiation, we probably would have a more productive political system, at least in my country. I'm sure there's people who have their views, and I understand. I'm not going to go into any of those specific issues, because that's just, to me, arguing about them, it's not going to produce results. But I feel like what it is if we just learn to kind of talk with one another, and focus on trying to get a good grasp of the issues, and kind of understand where's the best way to go, and ultimately sometimes those things will ultimately favor maybe a more conservative view, or may favor a more liberal view, depending. But I think if we take away these ideologies, if we could break them, and if we could just look at things through a more open and a more logical perspective, we would be better off, I feel like if we learned to get along, and if we learned to find common ground and find this kind of okay, I'm with you on this or whatever. And I also feel like it's also a lot of politicians, they don't like to admit when they're wrong. At least I feel like a lot of politicians, at least nowadays, don't really feel like they need to admit that they're wrong. They always think that they're right. They always think that their ideology, their mindset is right. And I don't know if the media is sort of to blame for that, but it does make somebody feel, at least for me, like when I watch these people talk, I feel like that they just want to say, yep, I'm right, and here's my evidence, here's my proof, I know what's the best, this other guy doesn't know anything at all, and that's how the argument's going to end. And to me, that's just not the way to talk with somebody. I think the way you say is just, look, here's my evidence, here's my facts, I don't see how we could go into the direction you want to go because I believe it'll lead to this, and this has been proven to do this, and yada yada. And the other person doesn't want to admit they're wrong. And if we can admit that we're wrong at times, and that we make mistakes, and that we're human, and that maybe we don't have our brain on straight, then we can learn a whole lot, and we can grow, and we can become better as a society. And I don't understand why there has to be this constant war and constant battle. And I feel like if you want to have a political party, or if you want to identify yourself as part of a political party, I'm not against that. I just don't think that they should control our political system. Like, we shouldn't have Democrats and Republicans. We shouldn't have majority, leadership or whatever under a certain party. It should just be for the best person for the job. I just don't understand why we need to have why we need to make things more complicated than what they need to be. So I guess that's ultimately all I can say in regards to this topic. I mean, I understand if people identify more with one party or the other, and I understand that if you totally disagree, we should have these parties because that's just how the things are, and this is the best way to go. I understand that mentality. You're allowed to have that view. But I feel that really they don't. I really feel like political parties really don't do anything. They just create a means to fight, and a means to talk over one another, and nothing gets done, and then we're left with the American people sort of fighting with each other in regards to politics, in regards to political ideology. I think out of all the things that I've seen people argue the most on the internet, I would say religion and politics are probably the two that most people seem to argue over the most. The most. And I just don't see a point in arguing for either side. I just see a point of, okay, you give me your facts, your view. Why should I believe this view? And why should I embrace this view? What evidence do you have for it? At least that's what my mentality is present me with evidence, present me with your case as to why this is and why we should do this instead. But if you're trying to to win a battle against somebody in order to prove your point to me, it's just not gonna work. I'm just not gonna end up believing either side, because I'll just look at both sides and go, you're just in it for your agenda again. Like, again, in it for the agenda, not really for getting a problem solved. I'm just gonna talk over this guy, and I'm gonna do that in order to win. And I don't think that creates a productive government. In fact, I think it really kind of divides people, divides sort of the foundation of sort of free thought and free thinking. Because with parties, I feel like you're not really free. You're sort of bound to their ideology, and you have to say, yeah, okay, I identify myself as Democrat, so I have to vote for the Democrat. And that's usually, I think, what the majority of people do. The majority of people don't base their vote on looking at every separate issue. They base it upon what party the person's in. And I just think that's a bummer, and I think we should look at things through a broader perspective and not tie ourselves down to these parties, because I don't think that they produce an effective result. But ultimately, I think that's really all I can say about this issue. I could probably go on and on and on and on and on and on, but I think in a nutshell, that's all I can really say on my view. I'm not against the idea of having some kind of political parties or some kind of ideology set up, but I'm kind of against it influencing our government and influencing our the way policy is handled, and influencing the sort of the foundation of this country. I just don't think that. I just think that it should be left on the side and shouldn't dictate our decision making within our government. But I think that's really all I can say. But I totally understand if you disagree. But yeah, I just can't see it any other way. But if there are any questions, comments, concerns, more than happy to answer them. But until next time, everybody.